Hello and welcome. We appreciate you taking the time to view and listen to our online presentation related to the passenger rail station location study in Colorado Springs. So my name is Chris Proud and I am a consultant working with Mountain Metropolitan Transit, and I'm going to guide you through the presentation today of our team's work. This is actually the first of two major stakeholder engagement milestones, and this particular presentation will be open from May 9th through May the 16th for viewing, as well as an online questionnaire that will happen at the end of this, where we'd encourage you to click and provide feedback to help guide our team. With that said, I'd like to walk you through a little bit of history and background context. So in terms of history, passenger rail actually existed in Colorado Springs as late as the early 1960s. Now, since that time, there's been a number of different efforts that have tried to reintroduce passenger rail service to Colorado Springs. The most recent being the 2020 Front Range Passenger Rail Alternatives Analysis. Now, all of those that are listed here are studies that have been completed and are all working again towards that effort of passenger rail in Colorado Springs or along the Front Range. There are some ongoing efforts as well. Currently, the Southwest Chief, which is an Amtrak service that goes from Chicago to Los Angeles, is being examined to potentially extend from its stop in La Junta to Pueblo and then on to Colorado Springs. And a station at Colorado Springs would be necessary to serve this. In parallel, the Front Range Passenger Rail Service is continuing a study to look at introducing passenger rail all along the Front Range from Fort Collins all the way down to Pueblo or beyond. In addition to that, to make any of these a reality, there's a lot of additional work that would need to be done. And these could be led by CDOT or the Passenger Rail Commission or the newly formed Front Range Passenger Rail District. But it could include identifying funding and then all the way through to design, construction, and ultimately operations. So with that as a basis, let's talk about our project specifically. This project is looking to identify the location of a passenger rail station in Colorado Springs. If the Southwest Chief or the Front Range Passenger Rail were to move forward, we want to make sure that the city and its residents are in a good position to respond and say, we want the station in this location because it works best for us from a community perspective or an economic perspective or a number of other reasons. And clearly we want to be considering connectivity, how we get to and from the station, a consistency with other plans that have been done, as well as the feedback from local stakeholders. The idea is to really provide direction to those groups that may advance the station forward on that preferred site, but also understanding that while the city of Colorado Springs is leading on this project, the actual development of the station would likely be led by others. In terms of our project process, we kicked off back in fall of 2021, and we've been doing a number of different steps that you see here on the graphic to complete our work in the summer of 2022. During that time, we are doing a variety of different engagement activities, such as this presentation and questionnaire, to try and seek feedback and guidance from our stakeholders. So let's dive into the meat of the project and the station considerations and evaluation itself. So when we talk about a passenger rail station, there are a variety of different elements that could be included in that. We need to serve the passenger rail function itself. We need to get people to and from, either walking, biking, driving. That's the multimodal integration piece. We also want to be thinking about the future and how do we integrate with electric vehicles, parking, charging, possibly scooters or other types of mobility that may be coming. In addition, there are value-added amenities that we need to consider if we're talking about service that requires ticketing or baggage. Also services such as freight and maintenance are quite important. And also how we integrate this into the public spaces within Colorado Springs and make sure that the station is part of the community as well. With that said, we have been following an evaluation process that has 3 steps. We're currently at the top at the blue initial screening, and that's really what I'm going to describe in more detail to you. But the idea is to narrow the number of sites that we're looking at so that we can look at them in more and more detail at each step along the way. Now, how we do that at this first initial screening level is we're looking at a variety of different criteria or just data that helps us to compare and contrast the different sites. And that can be benefits or impacts to the natural and social environment, through to traffic and parking, or even topography. So all of them are listed here at the bottom of the slide of the various areas that we examined. On the map, the blue dots that you see actually each represent a site location that we have taken through that initial evaluation. And when we were identifying our initial sites with stakeholders and the general public, we had some basic parameters that we followed. First, that they needed to be adjacent to the current freight rail corridor. Also, that they needed to have the general space available or potential land available that could fit everything that was needed for a passenger rail station. And then finally, we wanted them to be in relative proximity to other activity centers. So in other words, places that people would want to start out at or go to if they were traveling by train, and trying to make it as simple as possible, whether it's walking, biking, driving, etc. I won't go through all of the blue dots that you see here, but you can always pause the presentation and take a look at each and every one that we identified. Just to orient you a little bit on the map, you can see the rail line as it travels through Colorado Springs, parallel to I-25 and to Monument Creek and also Fountain Creek. Each of the blue dots is along the rail corridor and represents a location that we have been examining through our first level of screening. Now, through that first level of screening, we've been able to narrow the sites down to 4 of the most promising that we're going to dig into in a bit more detail and evaluate more closely. I'll describe each of these starting from the north. The green dots represent each of the sites that are advancing forward. The first on the north is the historic rail depot near downtown. This is a historic rail use, and it's possible that the rail operations would work well in this area also. Just below that is a dot that represents a potential site near the America the Beautiful Park. This is a key activity center as well as a redeveloping area. Just below that is a green dot that represents the Drake Power Station. And the power station is slated for decommissioning as well as redevelopment, so it could become a future significant activity center. So we'll be examining a location there as well. And then finally, you can see where Nevada crosses the rail corridor is the final green dot on the south. And there is a plan for high capacity transit along Nevada. And there is also a project that could realign the rail corridor as it passes over Nevada and Tejon and open up some potential property that could be used for a rail station at that location. So each of these, when we compared and contrasted all of the sites, really had strong potential for success as a passenger rail station with relative close proximity to downtown or other major activity centers. So these are the sites that are currently advancing and will be part of the questionnaire that we link to at the end, where we'd like your feedback to make sure that we're on track with identifying the right locations to continue to review. So with that, let's talk about our next steps. So we would like you to take our online questionnaire that is linked here. If you have any other questions, you can also contact our project manager at Mountain Metropolitan Transit or keep up to date on our project website with the link here as well. But it is important that you help to guide this study through the questionnaire, which will be open from May the 9th through May the 16th. So you can pass this on to other friends in the community and provide feedback and guide the study itself. So that concludes our presentation, and we thank you for your time going through this and completing the questionnaire.